Gennaria, welcome to Leading in the Dark. Nice to see you.
Likewise, Nick, it's good to see you as well.
So you are the president of Toky.
That is correct.
So what is Toky?
Toky is a St. Louis-based branding and strategic consulting firm. We specialize in about 60% of the work that we do is professional service related firms, primarily in what we call the built environment. So architects, engineers, builders, and allied industry. Most of the rest of what we do is healthcare, but we've been around for 27 years in St. Louis. And over that time, we've also been pretty involved in K-12 private education and branding, a lot of restaurants, still do some restaurants locally. Those tend to be passion projects for us. But yeah, that's Toky in a nutshell.
So you mentioned the company has been around for 27 years, but you've been there for a handful of years, 6 or 7, and you had a role before president, right?
Yes. Yeah. So I've been in St. Louis since 98 and have been at various agencies and joined Toky 6 years ago, almost 7 years ago, and started here leading research and strategy engagements with our clients. And then 3 years ago, in fact, it'll be 3 years in next month, I purchased the firm from Eric and Mary, the original founders.
Oh, wow. Congratulations to you
Thanks.
for that. Did you have that ambition to purchase the organization when you came in? Was that
Yeah,
kind of the whole plan?
it wasn't confirmed. We didn't have a deal or anything at the time, but it was definitely the direction that we were intending to go.
How many staff members do you have?
We have 15 and we're looking to hire a couple right now.
So tell me more about that whole acquisition process. And did the rest of the staff know that was potentially going on, or was there like a day one moment that it was announced?
There was a couple people who were very in the know of what was going on, some senior leaders. Others, I think, knew that there were things that were cooking, but didn't have all the details. And, until you actually close, you don't know if things are actually going to finalize. So creating a big to-do internally about something that hasn't quite taken place yet could be a little fraught. Yeah, we had an announcement right after I closed on the deal.
And how was that announcement? These day one stories are always interesting in some way.
I think because I had been here for a few years and the team was already understanding that Eric was ready to retire and move into the next chapter of his life, I think it was actually a relief for most of the team. The waiting and the wondering was over, and it wasn't because there's a lot of possibilities when you have a company that's been around this long, when you have the original founder still owning it, there's a lot of different directions it can go. We see a lot of firms that are being sold to private equity, in the agency business, firms being sold to some of the big holding companies, which never really seems to end very well. And then sometimes you just see firms shutting down. They just reach this natural point and the founders are done. So for the company to continue, to continue under leadership that they knew and understood, I think was a relief. And, I was very transparent from day one. Once we made that announcement, this is who I am. This is what I'm trying to accomplish. This is what might change. This is what's definitely not changing. Because what's interesting about stepping into this role with a company that has been successful for so long, it is that you have your own ambitions of what you want to do with it, but you also don't want to break it. There's something really good. And Toky in particular, I've worked in the agency business for a long time, and almost every agency has baggage, has people who have negative things to say about it. And I'm sure that there are people who have negative things to say about Toky or people who have worked here in the past. But generally speaking, when I talk to people, it's a very positive feedback. And that's all credit to the team, which the team that I have today is almost entirely the team that I started with 3 years ago, plus a couple of additional folks. So it's their hard work. It was Eric's vision for what he was creating. It was his commitment to an incredibly high quality of work that really cemented the reputation that Toky has had. both in the industries that we serve, because within the AEC space, our clients are national. We have clients from New York to LA right now. In fact, most of our clients in this space are outside of St. Louis. But then other things like healthcare and the restaurant business and what have you, that's primarily local. So it's really important that we have that great reputation locally, but also within the industry.
So, did you know you wanted to buy a business? A lot of people will say they want to buy a business or they want to own a business. But what was your motivator to actually do it?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes, but I know you want to hear more. I spent 11 years at one agency here in St. Louis and then 8 years at another. And a group of us at that first agency did make an attempt to purchase it. And buying agencies is a tricky business because it's not manufacturing, it's a service business. It's not the kind of thing that has a long-term contracts. So it's can be challenging to get the financing to do it. So, yeah, I was part of a group that tried to purchase that firm. I was interested in ownership in my other firm, but the owner was not really much older than me and was not in a place in her life and career where she was interested in doing that, which I totally understand. But for me, it's about being able to realize my vision. It's an element of control. I probably at some point in all of this, I would have started my own company, except there's a few personal reasons that prevented me from being able to go out completely on my own. So the opportunity to step into a purchase with an established company was really what I was looking for all along.
But you're using a lot of the vocabulary from the very popular activity these days called entrepreneurship through acquisition or search funds. That was the approach that I took to acquire this business. Are you familiar with that model, or you just discovered this whole approach on your own?
No, I think I stumbled into it accidentally.
And so I know you've had senior level roles previously in your career, but now you're the top person, you're the president, everything
Right.
rolls up to you. Is it different than what you expected?
In some ways, it's exactly like I expected, and in many ways, it's completely different. I don't think that until you own a business, you really understand some of the pressure that comes with just the very nature of ownership, the responsibility. I think if you're a good owner of a business, you are taking responsibility for the livelihoods of a number of people and the businesses that you serve, and you're part of those businesses. Yeah, it's a different level of responsibility. And it feels a little bit like being the point person in a platoon in one of those old war movies. You're out front and you don't know what's around the next bend, and you have to make the decision about when to move forward and when to stop, when to retrench, all of that. And it's not quite the same. My previous role, I was chief strategy officer, and I spent a lot of time, and I still do, working on my client strategy. And what's interesting about that is it's much more like being back at headquarters and planning big things, but it's not about being in the field and leading it. And there's a big difference in the weight of the responsibility and the kinds of decisions and things that you have to make.
The words that I use internally with our executive team that kind of match what you're describing is try to coach them like there's nobody else coming to help us. It's just us. We have to get these things done no matter how hard it is because nobody else is coming to save us.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've always been someone who worked hard and put in the hours and did the things that needed to be done. And I'm working harder now than I've ever worked in my career. At some point, I'm a big believer in working on the business, not in the business. I've spent a lot of effort over the last couple of years to spend less time on client work, more time focused on the business itself. And with the ultimate goal of getting to the point where I'm redundant. I think if I can get to that point, it allows me to focus on higher order things and eventually get to the point where that means that I have a staff that can run the company. And that gives you a lot of flexibility as an owner to make acquisitions into other businesses, to try new things with the business, and eventually step back some and be able to enjoy some of the fruit of the work that you put in.
Are you using any system like EOS to help you through that?
Yeah, so yes and no. And that's an interesting question. So you're probably familiar with Michael Gerber and the E-Myth. Eh,
Yes.
So that's been heavily influential in how I think about what we're doing with the business. And there are some offshoots of that. There's one called systemology that I've been using a bit to try and organize and structure things. We have made a toe dip into EOS, and about the time that we did, we started getting really, really busy and honestly just haven't been able to get back into it. It's one of those things where you need to focus some attention on getting it up and running. So we haven't quite gotten to that point yet.
Do you think you'll revisit it?
Yeah, would for sure.
This company used EOS before I acquired it. It didn't fit with my style. There's all different types of these operating systems. So we're right now implementing Scalable. Interesting one to look at. It just fit my style a little bit better.
What's
And
the,
it's
is there any quick takeaway on the differences? Because I'm not committed enough to EOS yet that I couldn't pivot.
Yeah, so this is 100% my opinion. So it's just no value judgment. I really didn't like it just felt too casual to me. EOS did. I didn't
Oh.
like them using the term rocks for
Mm.
goals. That just, to me, it made the importance of a goal seem less like it's just a rock. These goals and objectives and KPIs are real serious things. And it just, again, it's just a style thing, right?
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, all these operating systems are very similar. It's just how they brand them and put them together.
Yeah.
I found Scalable very easy to use.
Interesting. I have to check it out.
Yeah. So tell me more about the business, right? So we hear these terms from an outsider. You hear agencies, own an agency, or work at it. So tell me more, like what is an agency? I get that you're doing branding, but take me to the next layer of detail.
Yeah, there's a lot of different kinds of businesses that will call themselves agencies. I've worked in a couple of them over my career. Typically, when you think of the word agency, we're thinking about a marketing firm of some kind. So that may be a firm that's focused on digital marketing or search, or it could be something that's broader, more advertising campaign based. Agency of record is a term sometimes that gets used. It's the primary agency that a company uses, particularly larger companies. There's media agencies, the ones that buy and sell media. And historically, we've been a branding agency or firm. Agency in the marketing space puts people in a place, a mental place to understand a bit of what we do. So branding is really focused on the foundational identity and messaging that any business has. That how are they positioned? What's the significant differentiators that they have, and how do we capture those in messaging foundations? How do we capture that in the look and feel, which might include the name, it might include the logo, certainly includes the other visual artifacts that go around that. And then things like websites and other kinds of marketing artifacts are going to stem out of that. A more traditional marketing agency may do some of that work, usually as a byproduct. What they're focused on is the marketing campaign. How are we doing lead generation? How are we supporting a sales team? And we've started doing more of that work as well, particularly in the healthcare space. With professional services, we're still focused pretty heavily on branding. So our typical client engagement, they're going through some kind of an inflection, just like we've been talking about. Maybe it's a new generation of ownership. Maybe they've merged or acquired some businesses. Maybe it's just been a while since they looked at how they talk about themselves, or they're struggling to differentiate as they grow. So they'll engage us to help them define who they are, understand who they are, and put it into language that they can use when they're talking to other people. So we'll come in and do a lot of due diligence, conducting interviews, research, competitive And based on that and those inputs, we're really trying to understand what's the value system of the organization, what do they care about, how do they do what they do, what is it that they do, who do they serve, and what's their unique point of view that separates them from all the other businesses doing exactly the same thing in exactly the same space. And we'll translate that into different components of messaging, from a positioning statement to an elevator pitch to a brand manifesto they might use in a video. And in most of those cases, most of those projects also result in a refresh of the look and feel. Sometimes it's the logo. We're almost always working with existing businesses. We don't do a lot of startups. So sometimes that is a whole refresh of the logo. A lot of times it's not. A lot of times there's a lot of equity built up in that, and we're expanding on that equity and just giving them a facelift.
You're obviously touching on it a little bit, but is there kind of a best practice recommendation you make for companies to consider refreshing their branding? Like, should they do it every 5 years or?
I think it depends on what's working or not working for them. So if you think about, one of my favorite examples is the auto insurance business. If you think about the branding with the big auto insurance companies like Geico or State Farm or Allstate, that brand really hasn't changed. And in fact, part of what makes it so successful is that State Farm has been like a good neighbor for over 30 years. Geico has been using that gecko for over 30 years. So, what they're really doing from a marketing perspective is constantly doing almost mini refreshes. How can we take that jingle and do something a little different with it? How can we take the gecko and do something a little different or add something on the sides to it that fits within the brand? So we're one of our core tenets is first do no harm, and the second core tenet is that we think in decades. It's not necessary to refresh the brand every 5 years. What we really need to look at is the message that you're putting out still relevant, still differentiated? Is the look and feel still represent that message and who you are? If that brand leaned into some things that are trendy, you may need to update it. And there are certain businesses where I think you have to update on a much more frequent basis. If we think about clothing, fast casual, things like that, you may need to update more frequently. But even there, a lot of the couture brands, they haven't changed. A Gucci logo is still the Gucci logo from years and years ago. So if it's done right the first time, if the fundamentals of the business haven't changed, I don't know that you necessarily need to change the fundamentals of the identity. A refresh every 5 or 6 years is not a bad idea. Just make sure that the paint's still good.
You mentioned knowing what's working and what is not working. So if you were doing a discovery or some type of engagement with a business owner like myself, like how should I be thinking about, or how would I know what is working and what isn't working for
Right.
my brand?
Yeah. So the questions I would be asking as we talked and as I talked to your team and talk to your customers is, do you have a coherent story about who you are? And can you easily explain how you're different? If you could do that, then we have a really good, solid foundation to start from. But there's a lot of businesses, and we were talking about entrepreneurs. So there's a lot of entrepreneurs that get into businesses because they, as Michael Gerber says, they had an entrepreneurial seizure and they woke up one day and decided to go out on their own because I could make more money doing this for myself. Or maybe like you and I had a vision of the business upside of purchasing a business. But if you think about that business, why is it really fundamentally different than what anybody else that's doing what you do? How are you different? And for a lot of entrepreneurs, they can't answer that question. And so they end up falling back on tropes. So in the professional services, we hear a lot of times, oh, our people is what makes the difference. Or, we have a solid process that means that we always deliver on time and on budget. These things are all true, hopefully, but they're not different. It's what everybody else says. So people really want to know how you think. What is it that's different about how you approach the same thing that your competitors do. So what I'm looking for is, can you as the CEO, can your staff, can your salespeople articulate what really makes you different in a way that truly makes you different? I think a lot of businesses rely on relationships, and they're very important to forge relationships and to build businesses based on relationships, but it's hard to scale that. So if you truly want to scale your business, you need something that you can open the door with when your potential customer is dissatisfied with their current provider.
Do you have a specific example of a differentiator that you like in the services space? Because I'm 100% agree with you, and I had this friendly debate with another guest that, you know, any of our service businesses, mine's a service business, everybody says exactly what you just described. People first, we have better customer service than our competitors. Like, it's all the same stuff and everybody's saying it. So what have you seen that like really is a differentiator that stands out to you?
Yeah. So before I elaborate on that, I should mention one other thing. A lot of times, so we have a phrase that we like to use, the value is in the version. And what we mean by that is sometimes it's how you say what you say and not just what you say. So it's how do you put a unique spin on what everybody else says. So we worked recently with a engineering firm in the Northeast, and they're in New York. They have been around for quite a long time, and they started as an environmental impact engineering firm back when that was still relatively new as a concept. And in fact, as a result of being in New York, working for New York City and some of the municipal governments, and being early in this process and hiring some very smart people, they had the opportunity to essentially help write the book on what environmental impact regulations were going to be in New York City and the boroughs and the surrounding area. And that's a very interesting differentiator. It has been for years, but they're expanding what they do. And so when we sat down and talked to them, we were really focusing on how do we take this idea of being the kind of the OG in this space, the original, and what do we do with that? And what we discovered as we talked to them and we're thinking about this typical thing of our people make the difference. There were some interesting things about their people, the kinds of people that they hired, how they work together. And this concept of originality really started to bubble up as a core idea about how to talk about them being different. And we ended up landing on this idea of original thinking breaks through. It's not to say that their competitors don't do original thinking, but what they're doing with that phrase is they're packaging it in a way that they can now tell a story about it. They can use the foundations of the business, they can use their hiring practices, and they can use the way that they approach actually solving problems to all be proof points to this idea of original thinking. And when you've got a tough problem to solve, you don't want the same cookie cutter thinking that you're going to get from every other engineering firm. You want something original. So I think that, that truth, we call it a brand truth, that truth really gives them a starting point for a conversation. Why work with them? Original thinking. And here's how we can unpack that for you.
Yeah, that's a really good example. This question is probably silly to you. Once you have that, how tied is that core branding that you just described flow down to the purpose, mission, and values of the company? Because that's the next layer of everybody has their values and they all sound the same. And they're on the wall and they stay there and that's where it lives.
Yeah. You're hitting on something that is another core part of what we like to focus on. We used to, when we were doing branding, start with mission, vision, purpose, values as the starting point. And we've come to realize over time that isn't necessarily always the right starting point for every business. And really what we want to understand about the purpose is, do you have a purpose that's a higher order purpose that we can use to position the company? Or is your purpose really just to make money and do good work for your clients? In which case, we're not probably going to build on that. There's nothing wrong with that purpose. It's a perfectly good purpose. And I think the last couple of decades, and I love Simon Sinek, but the whole find your why has, I think, led a lot of businesses to struggle to try and figure out what is this larger impact that they're going to make in the world. And if you're not really going to go down that path and really truly believe in some kind of an impact like that at a larger scale, then I don't think that's where you should be focusing your attention. Values, on the other hand, is a building block. And here's how we think about values. You're right. A lot of companies' values were something that came together as performance, right? We have to have these sound good. It's why so many companies have integrity as one of their values. I think it's in the top 10 according to I think a Harvard Business Review study. And the funny thing about integrity, and this, yep,
Number
exactly,
one on the list right
number
there.
one on the list. And here's the thing, there's nothing wrong with that. It is an excellent value for a very good reason. Integrity, excellence, creativity, teamwork, collaboration, all these things are really wonderful, but they, in and of themselves, don't set you apart. And that doesn't mean that we need to go and find values that are quirky or odd or find clever ways to say them. Sometimes just the fastball down the middle is the right answer. What we're interested in is what are the behaviors attached to those values? And does the company really believe and honor them? You can tell whether a value matters to the company based on whether or not they are rewarding people based on them, and more importantly, whether or not they will tolerate behavior that goes against those values. If you have a high performing person and they don't follow one of those values, they're not collaborative, they're a team of one, does the company make an exception for them? That's the definition to me of whether or not you really have that value. So, what we look for is what are the behaviors that the organization uses to define collaboration, integrity, etc. My my go-to example is with integrity and two organizations that couldn't be more opposite from each other, and yet both essentially have integrity as one of their core values. The first is the FBI. It's in their motto: fidelity, bravery, integrity. We all know and have a sense of what that means when it comes to the FBI. It's the classic G-man, incorruptible, straight shooter. We think about Kevin Costner in The Untouchables, and we have this sense of what integrity means in the behaviors that we expect out of an FBI agent. But a few years ago, the Italian police raided a hideout in Sicily of a top mafia leader. And in that hideout, they found a document that they called the 10 Commandments of the Mafia. And it was a list of rules that they were supposed to abide by. And there were two of them that were essentially integrity. Don't rat on your family or your colleagues, and don't steal from each other. That's integrity. It's just a different kind of integrity applied in a different place. Normally, we wouldn't think of the mafia as being a bastion of integrity, but within their own definition and the behaviors that they expect, yeah, they could have put integrity on a poster and put it up on the wall. It's just, what do you mean by it? So, from a branding perspective, we believe that the brand ultimately is not about messaging and look and feel and all the rest of that. The brand is the experience that your employees and your customers have with your organization or your product. And so if your customers are having an experience, that experience, particularly in professional services, is driven by the behaviors of your people. And those behaviors, in the best case, are driven by your values. So there's a direct link to what that brand experience is from values all the way through behaviors and brand.
Jerry, you articulated that very well, which reminds me, I want to go back to something you said very early on when you were, thinking about buying a business and you actually acquired this one. You're preaching the sage advice from the ETA community that I referenced earlier is don't break something that's working. You have your own vision that you want to achieve. Are you comfortable sharing kind of what that vision is?
Yeah. So, you know, I'm speaking for the founders, but I think I can safely say that they were comfortable with the business being a certain size. So certain size that they could manage. Eric in particular is he's an exceptional designer, strategist, writer, thinker, and his happy place was working on client work and was just transforming businesses through the work that he did. And Mary was there alongside him, supporting him and making sure that the business ran and the business functioned. But I think that they were comfortable with the business being a certain size because that allowed them to be very in touch with every project, with every client. I have a vision of growing, and I don't want to grow crazy and completely out of control. But, my happy place is in building a business, not in doing the work for the clients. I want to hire people who are smarter than me to do that work on my behalf. Our largest client right now, I got an email the other day from the client just praising the team. And that's exactly the right thing because I'm not the one driving that work. I'm not the one doing all of that work. It is an amazing team that's doing it. And that's a scalable, replicatable thing. It just requires me as the owner and the CEO to be willing to take a step back and look at things at a higher level and not be in the weeds of the client work. So I think that's probably the biggest difference in taking this platform of what made and makes Toky amazing, which is the incredible nerdiness and deep dive, rabbit hole diving that we do when we do our work for our clients. That part doesn't go away. That's the special sauce that makes us unique. So my job is to figure out how to scale that.
You mentioned wanting to grow. So there's another phrase that every CEO, business owner that's at our age and stage of it, we're all going to say that. We
Right.
want to grow. We want to grow. But why do you want to grow your business?
Going back to the earlier conversation about purpose, I don't have a purpose that is about changing the world. I think we're driven by wanting to make a difference in our clients' businesses. So growth means a few things. One, we can do that for more clients. Two, growth means having the resources that lets us take good care of our people. The more profitable that we can be, and when I think about growth, it's really about profitability, and growth is also a component of that. But growth for growth's sake doesn't get you anywhere. It needs to be profitable growth. So that profitability lets me take better care of the people who are doing all that amazing work. It lets us take on more pro bono clients. We love working with local organizations, community organizations who don't have the funds to work with an agency. It's partially a way to give back, but it really gets to the deep-seated root of who Toky is and how we love to engage in the community. So being profitable with our paying work allows us to do more of that. And then on a personal level, I have certain financial goals that are really just about setting myself and my wife up to be secure as we reach the next phase in our life.
Jerry, you and I have known each other off and on for quite a long time
Yeah,
in the St. Louis community. So it's really interesting to catch up with you and hear your story. And congratulations on acquiring a business. And
likewise.
it's not for the faint of heart at
No.
all. Maybe just one final thing. You mentioned you're about to start your own podcast. So could you share some thoughts
Yeah.
on that? What you're up to?
Yeah, absolutely. So the podcast is called The Intangible Brand, and you can find some information at theintangible.brand.com. We're in the process right now of recording the first 6 or 7 episodes, after which we'll launch. We're looking at an August launch date. The focus is the intersection of employee experience and client experience. So my co-host, Carl Winstead, is an architect by training, works for one of our clients, and he is their chief experience officer. So we're both really interested and focused on how you create a brand by creating great client experiences, and how creating a great employee experience allows you to create those experiences. So we're going to be talking to business owners and professionals that work in this space.
Well, that's awesome. I look forward to seeing that when it comes out.
Awesome. Thank you.
Again, Jerry, thanks for sharing your story and congratulations on everything you've achieved. And I look forward to staying in touch on your journey.
Likewise. Thanks, Nick. I appreciate it.